Hello guys, and welcome to the first video in a while. Happy New Year's! Huzzah! All that good stuff. This was supposed to be a video about how the graphic cards leave a lot to be desired and put Megacolony in standard, premium, or V premium in a situation where they can't maintain hand pressure. But Bushiroad decided that DVS03 was going to fix with not just another rearguard grade 3, but control cards that actually play to Megacolony's characteristics. So before we get into those, we're going to be looking at the Drapha cards. And what better to start with than the grade 1 Pupa Mutant Drapha. Its skill reads as thus. Its auto skill. When this unit is placed on Vanguard, discard a normal unit. Search your deck for up to one card with Drapha as the same grade as the card discarded for the cost. Reveal it, put it to your hand, and shuffle your deck. Auto. This cost is reduced by Soul Blast to 1 for each of your opponent's rearguards at rest, in the same column as this unit. When this unit is placed on rearguard, Soul Blast 2 and draw a card. So, Megacolony is already saturated with grade 3 searchers. Thankfully, we're getting out of that hole and moving on to an archetype that can actually draw cards that aren't grade 3s that we can actually guard with. To be honest, the first skill isn't that great, compared to a lot of searchers of various archetypes that are simply on plays or don't even have a cost. Moreover, if the Megacolony player is second, they cannot use the skill to pitch the quick shield, since you can only discard normal unit cards, which means you cannot discard order cards. The second skill is better, but with the grade 3 secondary skill, it becomes incredibly questionable. Like the grade 2, the cards are control based, but do very little when the opponent doesn't play to board. If I had to put it on a 1 to 10 scale, I would give this card a 6 out of 10. The card's job is to give the player a way to draw cards, but you have to wait for your opponent to play, and the hand mulligan isn't great since you have to get rid of a lot of cards so you can play to this ride change strategy. The second of the DVS01 cards is Elite Mutant Drapha. Its skill is an auto skill when it attacks on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle once per turn. So you can counterblast and it gets 5k power until the end of the turn for each of your opponent's rearguards at rest. If your opponent has one or less rearguards at stand, draw a card. All of your opponent's rearguards in the same column as this unit cannot intercept or move to other rearguard circles. So unlike Hidden Blade Killer Leaf, this card is supposed to replace it as the generic grade 2 draw a card. So you would write this as Vanguard, and you would get your draw card by flipping over the one card in your damage zone. Almost immediately, this card saw play upon release, and it would see play as doing very well against large XL boards, or giving you plus if your opponent feels optimal about not playing the board. The only thing I can say is that while Megacolony still struggles for creating power on the board, Elite really changes it up and gives us more options. 8 out of 10. Elite Mutant Drapha answers a problem which Megacolony has had for a while, which the rearguards don't have a lot of power, so they can't actually challenge the opponent to guard with more than maybe a trigger or a grade 1. The control feature is kind of extra, but it's neat, and it plays into the grade 3 skill, so we'll look at that and see what we are working with. The third card is the grade 1 retiree himself, Evil Armor General Drapha. Auto. Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, counterblast and put a rearguard into your soul. Your opponent chooses 2 cards from their hand and calls them to their rearguard circles as rest. Those units are paralyzed, so they cannot stand during their next stand phase, and their auto abilities do not activate when they are called. Also on Vanguard Circle, continuous. During your turn, would be nice if it wasn't during your turn, this unit gets 5k power for each card with Drapha with a different card name in your soul. If you have 2 or more cards, and your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, the original critical of this unit becomes 2. There's so much to unpack here. And a lot of it isn't optimal, unfortunately, but we'll look at that. The first thing is first, Deluge and Renee finally found themselves a new partner in the Call 2 Duo and Mechanic department. The actual skill is on attack, which is nice, but the opponent gets an idea of what your board looks like when you use the skill, which can make it kind of difficult when you're trying to do multi-attack combos or when you're trying to set up certain power plays. There is an issue with Evil General. You do have to feed him a card every turn along with a counterblast. With Elite Mutant Giraffe, this can lead to using a lot of counterblast very quickly, even with the countercharge options that Megacolony is saturated with. This is probably actually to play into Intrude Sisters, though, because you're freeing up a rear guard circle, very similar to Venom Stinger, and this way you would be able to place Intrude Sisters on rear guard without having to play over another rear guard. The first skill is still confusing, though, because the grade 1 is not an act skill, it's an auto skill, which means that you have to wait another turn until you play Pupa. Which means that you're probably going to use it to guard and not to actually get the plus off of it. V Premium isn't so kind that you can just line up a lot of resources in your hand and not use them for a long period of time. When the opponent calls the 2 paralyzed units, there's a lot of clans that can still use them or even just restand them, since they can just be stood with skills or used for costs. There are multiple mechanics that bounce the hand, bind to their own cards, retire their own cards, lock, or just put them into soul. In a sense, I've heard many people say it's a card that beckons a guard 4 because of the second skill and having a crit, but it's not a skill I'm happy with. Having unique cards in Soul is terrible. There are better cards to have in Soul, like Gentle Moth, or even to write things such as Dorcas, or, well, there's more options, like Mechaning Hornet, and even other Mechaning options for that matter. Moreover, the fact that the skill gives 5,000 power instead of 6,000 power means that an opponent can still guard with a 1-to-pass with a crit or a front trigger, even if especially if you're playing against a Force Clan. The 2 crit is nice, but we also live in a world where you're attacked with 2 crit front row multiple times in a turn, so the grade 3 clause is confusing. It seems that they took a page out of the book of Spectral Duke Dragon, but they didn't consider the fact that Spectral Duke is attacking you with 9 Axel circles, so it's probably just so that you don't really have to deal with too much power and too many card attacks. What makes this skill even worse is that you want Elite Mutant Giraffe on your rear guard, not in your soul. Pupa has no reason to exist other than to be in the skill, but there are better targets for the first ride that cost even less, and you want to use Pupa for that rear guard skill on plays. To be honest, all I could give Giraffe is a 6 out of 10 if I had to put him on that scale. I think this lineup with Pupa, with being a nice card, but having restrictions and feeding into a game plan that doesn't last, makes it a very difficult control strategy that feeds a lot of cards and doesn't pressure the opponent as much as it needs to. It forces them to play cards, but there's a lot of decks that plus really well, so they usually have the opportunity to play cards that are disposable or that just feed into their costs and even make their situation even better. It's not as though the opponent is retiring these cards, discarding them, or even binding them, so it only serves to make the opponent have less to guard with. Having a crit is nice, but DVS01 had an opportunity to give clans other gift markers or allow them to generate different ones. There was a lot of different mechanics that they could have given to Giraffe, and while giving it access to Paralyze was nice, giving them a Generation Breakthrough mechanic was nice, it was not a lot to really help hand-wise or cost-wise. So before we move on to the recently removed support, I have to say that while at first glance the Jaffa stuff was nice, like most Megacolony support, it falls short of the drawing board. It is nice to finally have support for this Paralyze again, but the cards take too long in a format where dying at grade 3 is not too uncommon. The card generation is poor, but even more than that, it's difficult to decide what rearguard grade 3 to play for the deck. Unlike Venom, Stinger, or Gridora, you can't multi-attack or guarantee damage unless you specifically have the grade 2 elite on board, which is probably going to go into your soul to feed your crit and auto skill. This makes Injured Scissors an odd and crude point, since late game it's difficult to guarantee damage for its multi-attack from drop zone skill. At the same time, you're consuming cards for Jaffa's skill in a deck where it is difficult to Soul Blast, so running Antlion is also difficult. At first glance, having to play 2 cards and play Sentinel seems dumb before you realize you can guard the rearguard Antlion with 1 trigger, and your opponent just went -3 for a board that doesn't do anything. This isn't to say that Antlion is a terrible choice, although I have considered running Intimidating Mutant Darkface to at least put a pin in the cards that your opponent played, assuming they didn't adhere to any of the mechanics mentioned earlier. Even then, you still have to pitch cards for the skill, but at least you have a chance to get some comeback with the search skill for the Cradle Markers. The last point, I suppose, before we move forward, is that the deck counterblasts a lot. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but compared to some clans that counterblast maybe twice in the whole game, it's not that odd to see Megacolony counterblast its entire damage zone. Jaffa is your primary skill as well, so this is going to be the Vanguard you always use the skill on. But you're also going to be using elite skill in order to hit hard and pressure your opponent's hand more. So you're going to be counterblasting 2 at least once every turn. And what's more is that you're going to use Butterfly Deputy or Gentle Moth to get a counter charge, which means that you're hitting your opponent less, or your cards aren't going to be staying on the board to really mess with it. You could target the card that you plan to put in Jaffa's Soul with the skill from your grade 3, but even then, it's difficult because you don't get the counter charge since you don't put it into the soul with Butterfly Deputy's skill. The only thing I can say is that before we move on to DVS-03, running things like Stealth Millipede or Bloody Hercules are neat options to consider since they have stun mechanics and they give free counter charge if it lands unhit. Pa! Alright, now let us go to DVS-03. I'm going to try to ignore how good this support is because every other clan is going to get support that is absolutely insane. Like Kagero already got released that just destroys gift markers and a bunch of other stuff, which they're not going to play, they're just going to play the X, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to enjoy these cards for now. Brilliant Blister, Machining Armored Beetle, and Martial Arts Mutant Master Beetle. They fix so many of the issues that Jaffa brought forward. But without further ado, let's get into DVS-03, also known as the V-Clan Collection Volume 3. Brilliant Blister is the grade 1 for the set, and just like its polar relative, this card demonstrates a lot of Megacolony's most powerful mechanics. Auto, back row rearguard circle. At the end of your turn, if your opponent has no rearguards that stand, you may return this unit to your hand. Then if your opponent returned to the hand, if you returned it to the hand, not your opponent, and your hand has 6 or less cards, Soul Blast 1 and draw a card. When this unit is put at Guardian Circle, if your opponent's Vanguard is Rest, Soul Blast 1 and discard a card. Choose one of your opponent's rearguards, rested, and that unit cannot stand until the end of the turn. Amazing. Absolutely amazing skill. Insane. Can you understand why I immediately went into testing on tabletop after I saw these cards? But let's review the skill. Oh my god. It is about time we got a skill like this. What I mean is that Brilliant Blister's bounce to hand skill is tier 0. It answers a lot of Protect Clans' difficulties with maintaining hand and playing to board if their clan doesn't have a multitude of straight up draw skills. I would not be surprised if other Protect clans get similar cards like this, but the Soul Blasted Draw card is also very helpful when you commit a lot to board, or you commit a lot to your skills. The Guardian Circle skill makes this card very, very competitive, and it's going to fight for its position with its promo relative for a place in Premium, because it stops a lot of multi-attack decks, it stops restand decks, it stops just attacks in general from high-powered cards, and in V Standard it does even more since Premium has less options to do these mechanics. Vanguards that attack and restand, rearguards, or bounce and call now have to contend with the Brilliant Blister, stopping their attacks as a second Sentinel type for the opponent to deal with. This helps Megacolony deal with a lot of clans without just guarding a lot against Force 1 builders or multicolors, just clans that deal with getting a lot of power to begin with. This card, 10 out of 10. It's one of the best support cards ever since Gentle Moth got released. Not only is Brilliant Blister a resource card, but it deals with Megacolony's lack of power options by giving you the opportunity to prevent your opponent from tackling you with powerful cards. The resourcing skill is incredible since it allows you to make up for power differences relatively, or even rest Blister with a new Machining card or other Machining cards if that is the build you are going for. Machining Armored Beetle is the grade 2 of the set. Just like Brilliant Blister, it has an incredible skill. As a rear guard, you can rest another rear guard, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, rest it, paralyze it, and this unit gets 6k power until the end of the turn. If this unit is rest, all of your opponent's rear guards at the same column as this unit lose interceptive boost and cannot gain them. This card is a staple. Not only is Armored Beetle a grade 2 that can paralyze the opponent, but it actually gives it the basic power to be able to attack Force Vanguards and get over that 13k. They can even attack main deck grade 4s. With 2 Armored Beetles, you could actually place them at the back row of either column and prevent any boosting or intercepts by using the first skill to rest each other. This card both answers Megacolony's need to return as a control deck, but also gives it the minimum power necessary to hit the opponent, allowing for you to simultaneously paralyze opponent's cards. In a Premium Ghidorah build, this card will definitely see play since you can lock the remaining primary column free of boosters. While this card is just as good as Brilliant Blister, it will get a 9 out of 10 due to some things. Armored Beetle's Paralyze skill is great, so I can't give it too much critique, but it insinuates that you always need to place it on the front row, which is a noticeable weakness that can be exploited by a variety of decks that generate power very easily and just want to attack and get it out of the way. It feels as though if Bushy focused on this trend in the future, it might be better for directing cards to rest themselves to give other cards their benefits, whether that be drive, power, etc. The second skill deserves most of the points, since there are a lot of clans that generate huge power in the back row, but it can also lock intercept, which makes this card great for Giraffe builds since the opponent can just call grade 2s and intercept with them. Finally is probably the most interesting card in the set, the Limit Break Man himself, Martial Arts Mutant Master Beetle. Act. Vanguard or Rearguard Circle. Counterblast 1. Choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards, rest them, and they cannot stand during the next hand phase. If this unit is on Vanguard Circle, this unit gets all of the chosen unit's original power until the end of the turn. When this unit attacks, counterblast 1 and discard a card from your hand. And this unit gets drive +1 until the end of the battle for every 3 of yours and your opponent's rearguards at rest. Again, wow. Another rearguard capable grade 3 that isn't necessarily locked there. The first skill is self-explanatory. It paralyzes 2 rearguards, but also gains power so it can pressure your opponent. The second skill is the important part, although it conflicts with Brilliant Blister a little bit. In a Giraffe build, you can make the opponent place cards they wouldn't normally use, but if you follow up with Master Beetle the next turn, then you can pretty easily get an extra 2 drive onto this card. While your Vanguard usually gets a Sentinel used to block, getting a lot of triggers onto a rearguard can force your opponent to guard with a lot, or just have to drop another Sentinel on it. It also fills up your resources a lot, And if you still get the skill off of Blister, it just means that you and your opponent are stressed on resources, and you could very well do well to choke your opponent out in a control manner. It goes without saying, in Premium, this card does really well for general Paralyze if the player wants to use other G units besides the Ghidorah one. I will say that this card gets a 9 out of 10. This card is great. It gives you cards in hand, and although it does a lot for the deck, there are some easily defined weaknesses. The first is that with Master Beetle, Megacolony will struggle a lot more with countercharging. You already counterblast once for its act skill, and with the secondary skill. So you're looking at least 2 CB before you look at rearguard skills. The other easily defined issue is that on rearguard it doesn't generate power. It's nice that it can use the skill on rearguard, but it also can't pressure the opponent as much, or can even see turns where it's not attacking if you're using an Armored Beetle lock, because you're not getting any power on it from the skill. Megacolony already has difficult generating power on rearguard, so I really find it hard to believe that it would be that broken if if Martial Beetle generated the power still on rearguard. To be blunt, this card should be put at 8 of 10 because losing the power on rearguard is really, 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 really bad. But it has a lot of fair mechanics despite paralyzing 2, and it can have some difficulty putting pressure in the current V Premium format since there's a lot of skills that still play around Paralyze. All in all, a great and surprising support wave. In terms of V Premium, we got more than viable support for all Megacolony decks, which you could suppose is the best part about these collection sets. I highly recommend looking for and testing with a variety of the Megacolony builds because I don't know which one's best. I'm going to be working with some Giraffe builds for now, and that being said, I will put some decks here to show, and I hope you all enjoy. Give me some comments and thoughts, and I hope everyone has a happy New Year's.